Alright everyone, it's time to recap some of the great successes of Trump's first term, which has been a resounding success. I would rank him as a B-plus president. It's the first time we've had a good president, at least since Ronald Reagan, and of course you can make the pitch that he wasn't quite as good as people give him credit for, especially second term. First term a little bit more, but we'll get over the Reagan worship cult for now. But first, I am shadow banned on YouTube. If you're watching me there, there will be links in a pinned comment as well as in the description to 4 other sites that I make videos on. You can join me there, or if you want to watch me on YouTube, I do ask that you share the link out on some other platform where I can actually be found, because otherwise 0 people are actually going to find the channel, because I'm not searchable for all intents and purposes unless you're already subscribed. And of course, when you've got a large audience over time, subscribers get banned, subscribers leave the platform, subscribers unsubscribe in order to clear their lists, and so the number of subscribers will actually tend to decline over time even if you're getting huge numbers of views. That being said, we're going to focus on just the major accomplishments here, because otherwise we'd be making an hour-long video, and there are some people that would like that, but I have to make the other ones and also do like a cooking video maybe later, and there's a huge amount of stuff that I have to do, so I can't spend the entire morning just talking about Trump. First, I would say the wall. And some people would disagree, like even a lot of the people that still support Trump very much have criticized him over this, said, well, the wall didn't really get built. Under the circumstances, he did, number 1, as best as he could, and number 2, completely outstripped my expectations. I did not expect we'd be talking about 400 plus miles of wall. Now, only a proportion of that is new barrier. But the idea is that if you're replacing a 3-foot vehicle fence or like an 8-foot chain link with something that's 30 feet tall, that's a fairly substantial difference, and the reason that there was any barrier there before is specifically because it needed to be protected more. The fact that I think something like 300 miles of that is a new wall and it's replacing existing structures, that's misleading when people attack him on that. And you got to understand, for the first 2 years of his presidency, he didn't even have the will of his own Republicans. He kept getting blocked in the House by the Democrats. He got blocked in Pentagon funding, disbursement by the Ninth Circuit for a while. He finally got it accomplished, and although not quite as much as he wanted to build, ended up getting built. What's there is there, and fairly effectively. It's a big improvement to southern border defense. Not perfect. Of course, if you give him a second term, he'd probably complete the rest very easily, but it's there. It got done. So promise kept. Second, I'd say the First Steps Act. And this completely blindsided the liberals because, of course, the left is usually like, and liberals, they're like softer on crime, or you could say like they want reform of the criminal justice system. But Trump is the one that ended up getting the ball rolling, is the main architect and sponsor of the idea that people who, ironically enough, in many cases are locked up because of the '94 Biden crime bill could actually get out, get their record expunged, go about their lives, because the only thing they did was like, I had some weed. They were a drug addict. They dealt a little bit of weed. No one really cares. At the end of the day, in retrospect, when we look back at that tough on crime drug policing, we say it's like the Dark Ages. Well, Trump did something about it. He even managed to get quite a bit of bipartisan support. Very interesting. And that's not easy to do in the hyper-politicized climate that we have today politically. Third would be right to try, and in the context of a pandemic, right to try is definitely important. Which is the radical concept that if an individual's terminal anyway, they got like a 99% chance of keeling over, they should basically be able to use whatever experimental treatment they want, and the FDA shouldn't get in its way, because they're going to die anyway. As long as they consent to it, as long as they're volunteering, that can advance science faster, number 1, and number 2, it gives them at least a little bit of hope that they might recover. I think that's arguably his signature legislation. Arguably, right to try is the most important thing that Trump did. In the context of the current pandemic situation, fast-tracking things by giving people who otherwise, you know, you're in the ICU, you're going to be put on a vent, but we've got this pill we can give you and it might help you. Yes, give me the pill. That's important. And I don't think that the government ever should stand in the way of that sort of thing. The fact that Trump is the first one to recognize him is directly anti-authoritarian in nature, and it's very, very funny to me. Next, I would say his hesitance towards war. He's been reamed by the Democrats on this. Well, he's scaled back the U.S. on the world stage. He's abandoned our allies. No, what he's done is he's refused to pour new resources and troops into foreign theaters that in many cases we never should have been involved in. has refused to expand existing conflict and hasn't invaded anyone. And he's a Republican. Keeping that in mind, that makes it 10 times more important. We're used to the Republicans being like gung-ho war pigs, like a Bush, wanting to invade things and showing off new weapons. And what Trump has realized is it's not really helpful. I think that he looked to the Bush-Obama years, looked at all the shit that we were doing and said, well, enough is enough. At some point we have to go back to reality, and it's not really necessary for us to be putting huge amounts of resources in a country that in some cases we're basically wasting money on because they will never actually be solvent. Like the Afghan government. It has less power than the militias in that country, to the point where we have to literally parlay with the Taliban to keep them afloat. We cannot prop them up forever. And it's pointless. There's no reason to. It has nothing to do with us. It's a backwards, landlocked state halfway across the world that got targeted because Osama was there briefly before he fled to Pakistan, and we've been there ever since. And Trump said, well, we're going to withdraw most of the troops from that country, to the point where the deep staters even lied about troop totals in some places, like in Syria, where that outgoing envoy to Syria said, oh yeah, we misled Trump for several years, ha, committing treason probably in the process. I would say record low unemployment is definitely a positive achievement. Near record low as far as the total number. Now, part of this is, and this is something that you have to admit, you have to be honest within political analysis unless you're a complete partisan. Part of that is lower labor force participation as the boomers begin retiring. However, again, under the circumstances, getting that unemployment rate as low as it went is fantastic, and something that Obama and others claimed could not happen. They claimed there was a 7% minimum structural unemployment rate, and it cut down below 5%. So it proved the neoliberals were wrong. Under the circumstances, with higher business confidence, which was 100% Trump's doing simply by being Donald Trump, by the way, and it's seriously just perspective over reality in that case. It's appearances only. It's his pro-business sort of charade, his boardroom charisma. That paired with stripping back regulations. We could add that in as an accomplishment too, although there's a whole host of regulations across 1,000 different fucking alphabet soup bureaus, so it's a little bit more complex. The VA reform. This is something he did right off the bat. Within his first few months of office, Trump tackled an issue that had been plaguing the U.S. for decades. The VA, I can remember back in the 90s, stories were running, oh, the VA, we got a Legionnaires outbreaks, the VA refused this person treatment. The VA looked for excuses not to treat this class of vets, and all sorts of crazy stuff. And we've made a promise as a country to people who were willing to put their lives on the line and basically stabbed them in the back for decades and decades. Trump completely ended it. You know how he solved the problem? The MSM never reported on it again. Have you heard one mumbling word about the VA in the last 4 years? Nope. Not since that initial report on VA reform that they buried on page 2. If people knew all the things that Trump had accomplished, by the way, I mean, it'd be insane. Then, downing the TPP. The TPP was so unpopular that Hillary Clinton had to edit her own autobiography to omit the section where she called it the gold standard of trade deals. Which, in the TPP, of course, is a job killer. I have no expectation that, unfortunately, we won't enter into a similar renamed trade deal fairly soon, after Trump's second term, in the next few years. Depends on the legal circumstances, honk honk, of the totally fair election we just had. But anyway, downing that was important. Of course, he and Hillary both ended up pledging that. It was really funny because she would have signed it if she had been elected. Let's face it, she would have done a flip-flop on that one. That is a guarantee, just so you're aware. Reforming NAFTA, replacing it with the USMCA, again, mild reform, incremental reform. I talked about that the first year or two in office. Really, Trump's basic strategy, because he couldn't get around even the Republicans in his own GOP-held Senate, narrowly albeit, because of rhino-cons, what he did was he looked at incremental ways that he could pick apart a few regulations here, tweak a trade deal a little bit there, and those incremental improvements for 2 years mounted up to create the juggernaut economy that, by the way, is still protecting us from a worldwide depression. The structure of the economy that he formed was robust enough to withstand a total worldwide lockdown for several weeks and all the weird shit that's happening currently. The Abraham Accords, another great success. He managed to get, not necessarily the most friendly regimes of the Middle East and parts of Africa to begin signing on peace deals that take the pressure valve and really release a lot of steam in the Levant region with regards to Israel and Palestine. That allows for future diplomacy on a much better level, and I fully expect that in time, I fully expect that this will lead to a binding peace resolution there. That's the gold standard of peace resolutions. This is what Trump originally wanted to do. He actually failed at this. It was clear that he wanted an Israel-Palestine peace agreement in his first year of office. When he realized that wasn't possible, he pivoted to the next best thing, which is Korea. That's another great success, by the way, getting the DPRK and ROK to go to accords, step across into each other's territory, symbolically of course, repatriate remains, remove landmines, destroy border posts. Even with North Korea going back to missile testing and bloviating and ranting about war and stuff, peace broke out in the Korean Peninsula. The odds of an armed escalation there are considerably smaller than they were a few years ago. That's his biggest foreign policy accomplishment really involves the ROK and DPRK shaking hands. That's his biggest foreign policy accomplishment. The Abraham Accords are just part of that wider diplomacy, and of course tax cuts. Unfortunately, those lapse, and even the GOP murmurs about not wanting to extend them. Oh, we'll be insolvent, stuff like that. Well, think about the debt. Of course, every 4 years, a different party cares about the debt, and the other one stops caring after the previous 4. It doesn't even matter. Trump's first term overall was a resounding success. He was considerably better than Obama in his first term, and I do believe there will be a second, whether it's now or in 4 years. Just saying, unless he croaks or something. He'd be the same age as Biden, so age does apply at some point. Keeping that in mind. Obama, I would have given him a D+, a mercy D, basically, just because he didn't fuck up the country and start a nuclear war. Bush, I would give a flat out F. You can't call him anything other than an abysmal failure. Clinton, arguably at best a C-. Again, the economy going on ahead was largely not his responsibility. The end of the Cold War, of course, dates to policies that come before him. Herbert Walker, another F. Both Bushes were abysmal failures. This is why Jeb got curb stomped, a little Jeb. And then you go back to Reagan, you can give him a C+, maybe a B-, at least for the first term. You have to go back quite some time. You have to go back to JFK and Eisenhower to find presidents that did as well as Trump has done. And he managed to smash into one term successes that many presidents couldn't mount in 2. Many presidents, Biden's entire political career, his 35 years or something in the Senate and his 2 terms as VP, he accomplished less than 1/10 of what Trump did in any single year in his first term. I think he did a great job. I think that history will judge people fairly harshly who have been calling him Hitler. I think that retrospectively the history books will do what they tend to do, and they will look back 20, 30 years later when Trump is no longer probably in the land of the living, and they'll say, oh, we judged him so harshly at the time. But when I think about it, when I really think about things from a fair perspective, which is difficult for political scientists, not so much for independent analysts, I think a lot of people, their eyes will definitely be opened. That's about all. Peace out.